Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
And thank you again for downloading and listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Collin Manley, and it's time to officially start talking more about the offseason. Hey, we actually had that World Series finish. Gotta throw out my congratulations to the Los Angeles Dodgers for taking the World Series over the Rays in 6 games. We're going to talk a little bit about the game today, a little bit. We're going to have one segment dedicated to it. But the rest of the time, we have a lot of stuff that we need to focus on building into the 2021 season. We got to talk about news and noise around the league because there has been a lot that has happened since the end of the World Series. So we got to get caught up on everything that's going on there. We also need to talk about that World Series, like we said. I want to talk about kind of the big decisions that happened in that game and just some thoughts and opinions on that. Want to get some updates on players with some options going on to the 2021 season. And then also just have a little bit of a free agent guide by position. What are we looking at? Who are some of the biggest names that are going to be available in free agency? Not going to touch upon trades today. That'll be another discussion for another day. But we'll talk about those guys that could be free agents depending on those options and ones that we already know for sure are going to be. But starting things off, we are going to be looking at a lot of contract decisions that were made recently. Starting things off with one of our World Series teams, the Tampa Bay Rays. They have decided to decline the 2021 options on pitcher Charlie Morton and catcher Mike Zunino. But the team is hopeful that they will be re-signing them. Now, Tampa Bay is a team that doesn't work under a massive, payload. They definitely try to do more budget deals. And Morton, who is going to be 37 years old next month, he was due up to $15 million next season. Probably going to try to grab him for less than that if he is going to continue to be most likely their number 3 starter moving forward. Zunino's option was worth about $4.5 million. Catching position was not the strength for Tampa Bay last season. So he might return on a cheaper deal potentially, or if you find something elsewhere, I don't think Tampa Bay is going to be crazy upset with the fact that they might have to move on and reconsider the catching position, at least moving forward into the 2021 season. So, 2 decent-sized moves when it comes to our American League champions and almost World Series champions. Staying in that American League, some pitching news. Corey Kluber becomes a free agent after the Texas Rangers on Friday declined the $18 million contract option for the right-hander, who only lasted, 1 inning into his only start before a shoulder injury kind of ended the season for him in 2021. It's a $1 million buyout, so it's a cheap move for the Rangers. I don't think this is going to surprise anybody. It makes Kluber interesting. He has been struggling with injuries in the past, and so the Rangers took the chance and traded for him last offseason, and they sent back a reliever in exchange. And like we said, Kluber only made it 18 pitches into the season, leaving with shoulder tightness, ultimately getting shut down. He is 34 years old, and he had a small tear in his shoulder muscle. It's going to be interesting to see. He is someone that I would keep an eye on as a discount potential upside starting pitcher, I should say. He's one that it's more name than it is play as of recent. He hasn't been healthy, hasn't had the ability to go out there and be as dominant and effective as he has been in the past. So I'm looking for some sort of contender team. Somebody's going to sneak in and I think swoop him up and get him some big innings, or maybe he'll convince a team to give him money, but I find that hard to believe, at least looking at it right now. predicting Corey Kluber could be a very nice discount signing for a team, but $18 million just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Sticking with some of those contract options, the Chicago White Sox have declined a $12 million option for designated hitter Edwin Encarnacion and a $7 million option for left-hander Gio Gonzalez. Those moves were also announced on Friday. The team had also decided to exercise their $3.5 million option on utility man Luis Garcia. They reinstated right-hander Michael Kopech from the restricted list, activated righty Jimmy Lambert from the 60-day IL, and a lot of moves going on with the White Sox. Now, Encarnacion, this move is no surprise here. The 37-year-old, he hit only 157, 10 home runs during that shortened 60-game season, 377 slugging percentage, lowest he's had in his career. And first time below 450 since 2009. Gio Gonzalez was considered to be, a smart move for there. Only a 4.83 ERA in 12 appearances, and that was only 4 starts. So he really has kind of had up and down. He's had some good stints, some bad stints, trying to find something that works for him. He's got to get another option somewhere, you got to imagine, but it's going to be on a cheap, really prove-it deal when it comes to the White Sox. A lot of moves happening there. Staying in that American League Central, the Indians decided to go with a few moves as well as they declined the options of Brad Hand, $10 million on Friday. Carlos Santana, first baseman, $17.5 million. And outfielder Domingo Santana, $5 million. The Brad Hand one comes to be interesting. He had a really good season last year. Now, he wasn't necessarily striking out a lot of guys, but he was closing out games. And it seemed like this move was coming. They had talked about it a little bit on Thursday. He was placed on waivers. And so another team could claim him to avoid a buyout, but it looks like that's ultimately not going to happen. He's only 30 years old. He led the majors with 16 saves, but the Indians just thought $10 million was going to be too much for him, decided to move in a different direction. So we're putting another reliever out on the free agent market. We got a few of those that are going to get paid this offseason, it looks like. Talk more about those names later. So that one's interesting. Carlos Santana, this is a buyout of $500,000. Was an easy move as they didn't want to pay that 17.5 because he isn't playing up at a 17.5. And it's looking like potentially we could see some of these moves as a bigger picture type thing if the Indians are considering a long-term contract with Francisco Lindor. So trying to shore up some money, save up some money there so that they can make an extension possible. So something definitely to keep an eye on for sure. But it's just inklings at this point. Nothing confirmed on that front. The Chicago Cubs declined the $25 million team option on pitcher John Lester on Friday. And it looks like they could potentially be picking up the $16.5 million option on Anthony Rizzo. Lester was 36. He's at the end of his 6-year, $155 million contract that the Cubs had him signed on. Now, he could return on something smaller. That's what a lot of these options you have to consider and think about. These guys could come back and work in on a smaller deal, but John Lester is just not a pitcher for $25 million anymore. But he's also another name that I would be watching, similar with Kluber, that could just be a discount signing somewhere. A guy who's going to come in, eat some innings for you, but getting up there in age, you wonder if he's really going to want to move on or if he wants to stay with Chicago to end his career. There's a lot of different ways that one could go. We'll see what happens there. Moving to some other news when it comes to MLB. The MLB owners have approved the sale of the New York Mets to billionaire Steve Cohen. Purchase of 95% of the Mets by Cohen. It was a big move. Cohen needed 23 of 30 clubs to sign off on the deal to be approved. The vote was 26-4. That sale is going to be at a value of $2.4 billion to $2.5 billion in that range. Cohen, if you're not familiar, is the CEO and president of .72 Asset Management. It's just a big, big move, big transition for the Mets. It makes me interested to see what their offseason is going to look like. To put it kindly, a lot of these guys, when you get to be a new owner, you got to think some of these guys want to be aggressive right away. And we've even been hearing some quotes from Noah Syndergaard. He's really excited about the change in ownership. He must think that they have some conversations on how they're going to change the team, maybe get the team to be a little better, maybe dip into free agency. There's a lot of different ways that things could go. I'm sure that the name like GT Realmuto is going to be thrown in there a lot. They're going to be suitors for that, maybe even some of those starting pitchers. There's just a lot of ways that could go. So it's a big move for this to be approved as we are going towards free agency. Some manager news. Well, we already are familiar with Tony La Russa joining the Chicago White Sox, something we had previewed before, talked about, has a little history with the Chicago White Sox organization. So no massive surprise there, especially considering the fact that the team wanted to get a manager with winning experience. I also do want to point out, as this move is being made, because there are some people that have questioned this. They thought there's a couple other guys that made a little more sense when it came to the managerial move. But I'm looking at owner Jerry Reinsdorf and looking at the year he has just had. He is someone who had the MJ Michael Jordan documentary come out, and I think a lot of people don't look at him in the best light right now. Now, it's not just him. It was also with general managers as well in there, but there was a lot of questioning after that series about how he was with leadership, how he was with contracts, how he was with Phil Jackson as a coach and everything. So I am not surprised that he has decided to go with what might be considered more of a safe managerial decision, not necessarily trying to nab somebody that would be controversial in any way, which might have happened with Hinch and Cora, and we're going to get to those two in a little bit. But I think he's just trying to go with the well-liked guy, make the safe decision, I don't want to say easy decision because we don't know how it's going to pan out, but definitely a safer move in the sense of we're not trying to ruffle any feathers here with how this is going to go. So La Russa going to the Chicago White Sox, and also AJ Hinch agreeing to become the next manager of the Detroit Tigers. Had to wait out his entire suspension. Hinch knowing he wanted to come back to baseball. It seemed very quickly after the World Series was finished, Hinch was talking about his phone was ringing, and Detroit's general manager, Al Avila, didn't waste any time. He got Hinch on a plane, got him to Detroit, working out that whole deal. It just seemed like this was coming. There's no real massive surprise here. You knew Hinch was going to come back to baseball with all the success that he had with the Houston Astros. He's done with his suspension, so he's able to move on. We'll see where this goes. Now the Tigers have some young players, some potential players. It's hard to say that you expect anything right away, but Hinch was also a big part of the rebuild in Houston and getting those guys to be better. So I'm sure the Detroit organization is happy to have him and is very excited about the potential that could be coming from this. And lastly, with some manager talk, this is another one that we predicted we saw. If he didn't get the job in Detroit, Alex Cora and the Red Sox, you had to think were potentially going to be discussing again. So Tony La Russa going to the White Sox, Hinch going to the Tigers. That leaves the Red Sox as the big time vacancy. And me, even as a Red Sox fan, I also know he was in the role in the Astros Stein stealing, was the bench coach there, was suspended for the 2020 season. I think there's a good chance that he could end up being the guy back in Boston. And I, as a fan, kind of want him back just because I saw what he did as a manager. Now, I don't know 100% what his part is in all of the scandals, if there was anything with the Red Sox when their World Series. If there's more information, then obviously my opinion will change. But it looks like the dialogue between the two teams is going again. Don't be surprised if you see potentially we see Alex Cora returning to the Red Sox. So that's what we're looking at when it looks for our last managerial position to be filled in. So that's going to be it for news and noise around the league. A lot of contract talk. I know I breezed through a lot of it. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of these as well, because we're going to dive into some options that are out there. We have some that are picked up, some that are still out there to be decided upon, and we'll try to cover as many of those as we can. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to take at least one segment to discuss and talk about a couple of the big things that happened in Game 6 of the World Series. And we're going to give our opinions, our breakdown of everything that seemed to happen here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
So we have some fun things we got to talk about, especially when it comes around the World Series. We just got done discussing news and noise, getting you up to date on some managerial moves, along with some contract decisions that are going to be made. Those are going to be coming kind of like crazy. I feel like a lot of decisions each team is going to have to make. This 2020 year is going to be 2021 offseason, I should say, is going to be very interesting in the sense of how teams are going to really look at themselves, because in this 60-game sample, a lot of people are going to be thinking, oh, do we have to make some big moves? Did we not have our chance to turn things around? Do we believe in our talent? Do we think we can upgrade in some spots? It's going to be wild. I'm hopeful that it's going to be like a normal offseason, but I get a feel right away that it's not going to be quite the case. But I wanted to take a little bit of time to discuss the World Series and what we had happen in the sense of Game 6. We left with a little bit of controversy during the game and somewhat after the game. So I wanted to take a chance to talk about those things. The first one, the one that just feels like it has a lot of discussion, has to go with the decision on Blake Snell leaving the game for Tampa Bay. So now, if you're obviously not familiar, Game 6, the Dodgers bested the Rays 3-1, but before they even had a lead in that game, Blake Snell was pitching magnificently for the Tampa Bay Rays. He had 5 1/3 innings, 73 pitches, 2.7 ERA is what he's going to leave with in this postseason, but 9 strikeouts. He was really doing a great job at not getting hit very hard, and he had no walks at that point. It seemed like his control in the game was phenomenal at that sense. And so then we kind of fast forward to that 6th inning where the Dodgers put up the 2 runs. At the time, Snell had surrendered a hit. And with that, Kevin Cash made the decision to make a pitching change. Now, this pitching change came before Mookie Betts was coming up to bat. So we had Barnes singling to center, and Betts got the opportunity to hit off a reliever. Now, why did this move happen? Well, Blake Snell had a lot of pitches left that he could probably work with. These guys are conditioned to go up to 100 easily conditioned, these starters in their best situation. But we don't see many of these starters get to that 100 point because there is that fear of when a batter is getting to see you a third time around. Now, there is statistics, there are numbers that back this. It's the same type of idea with the bunting, why we don't do that anymore, why we're swinging more for power than we are for singles. All of these numbers taken together over time. Batting averages, when a guy gets to see you a third time around, they jump. They really jump. And that's why it's hard to keep these guys in at the highest level of games. And put on top of that, Mookie Betts one of the best players in baseball, might have been the best player in the series, even though he didn't have the best stats, just overall player, he might be the best one. And so Cash had some concerns. He didn't want Betts to see the same guy for a third at bat. Bring in a reliever. What ends up happening, Betts doubles to left. Big move. And then we have a wild pitch that brings in the run. Betts goes to third. Then one more single from Seager to bring in, or a fielder's choice to first for Seager, and that brings in Mookie Betts. The Dodgers grabbed a lead in that 6th inning. And a lot of people are going to talk about, well, was this the right call? Was this ultimately what you should have done? And to be fair, to be honestly fair on out, we can criticize, we can say whatever we want, but we don't truly know. Nobody knows. Betts could have gotten a hit off of Snell all the same the next at bat. We could have seen that happen. You can't play the hindsight game and saying, "Oh, look what happened here." You gotta stick with your guy. That is the only thing. That's my issue here. Is I fear sometimes in these games we overmanage. We fall on these numbers too much. We're looking at the statistics of what a bunt actually does, what swinging for the fence actually does, what really is happening when we get to see these guys a third time. Because when we do that, we overthink decisions, we make some decisions in fear, and that could be a problem. I know what these numbers say. I understand fully what is happening with these numbers. But at some point, as a manager, as a team, you have to be like, okay, this is my ace. This is my stud. This is my guy, Blake Snell. He has gotten me through 5 innings. Yes, there's a runner on, but he's already gotten an out this inning. He has 73 pitches, so he's not tired. He's not out of this. He hasn't walked anybody. This runner is only on first. Like I would be sitting there going, this is my guy. I have to trust my guys. And you could see it in the game. When the pitching changed, Blake Snell really couldn't believe it. And after the game, he said the same. He's got his confidence in himself, and that's what he has to say. That's fine. But you got to ride the people you believe in a little bit here. You gave him the start for a reason. He had the lead. I just think this was an overthinking situation. And I can play the devil's advocate on this as well and go to the other side and go, hey, our bullpen has been pretty phenomenal all season, just trusting those guys. But if you also want to play the numbers, let's look at what your bullpen's been like in this World Series. Nick Anderson has not been great. Okay, he ends the World Series with a 9 ERA. Loop ends with a 7.71. Fairbanks, 6.75. Those were the next 3 guys you use. And yes, you got to trust them. Yes, you got to believe in them. But Snell had been the better pitcher out of those 3, and he had been showing it in that game. And you were asking a reliever to come up in a big spot and really shut things down when you had a guy that was doing well enough. I just continue to fear with some of these numbers, yes, you can buy into them. You can use them for situational in the regular season. But the postseason is a different animal, and I don't want teams overthinking situations. Ride with your guy who is doing things fine. This isn't a bullpen game for them. You have Snell out there because you know what he's capable of. You know what he can do. You had a lead, too. It's a different story if the guy who's been pitching for so long gives up that lead. And yes, that one run goes on him, that earned run from that single. But I mean, he wasn't responsible for the double. There's too much. There's too much there. I think it was a poor decision. And I don't want to overmanage. I don't want to overthink these things in the biggest spots, especially when you're in there with a guy that you trust. And I don't want to sit here and pretend like I'm the one playing the hindsight card either. But I was with a lot of people in the moment where I was going, this seems like overthinking. This seems like too much. It didn't feel right when it was happening. And this is where analytics can get you into it's just a big issue. We can look at these analytics and try to break them down even further because these numbers are for when you see a guy a third time. But let's look at Blake Snell. What's the numbers when he's seeing a guy a third time? Is it that big of a jump as it is for the league average? I would imagine it's not. There's just a lot there that it ultimately looks like it might have been something that could have turned the tides in that game. Now, the Dodgers ended up pinning one more run on later, which that happened in the eighth, and most likely Snell wouldn't have been there in the eighth. So you don't know what would have happened there. And at the same time, the Rays didn't put up any more runs the rest of the game. So who knows if that would have played a factor anyways as well. They had one run of support the entire game, a home run by Rosarena. That's it. So this could really go a lot of different ways. And I can't sit here and say this is why they lost. But in the moment, it just did not feel like the right decision. Now, the other big controversial moment in the World Series truly falls on the whole Justin Turner move. Justin Turner tested positive for the coronavirus during Game 6. Now, the one thing that's really in question here is when this positive test was received. Now, he was pulled later in the game. I believe it was the 7th inning. And there's rumored stories, and we don't know what 100% is true, that the MLB might have potentially knew in the 2nd inning of this positive test. And that's what makes this entire thing scary, because they talked about how they isolated him. There was articles written how he was away from the team, not a part of the celebration. But we have him on film. We have him on camera. We have him on pictures. He's out there celebrating. So the MLB is in a tough situation here, as there is conflicting reports kind of everywhere. And it just seems odd that the MLB is saying how we're trying to pull him out of the game, isolate him, and get him away from everything. Also, at the same time, you're playing in this bubble format, and you're talking so highly about how many days you are going without positive tests. I mean, they're stringing them together, and they were so proud of that number. And then the game is over, the World Series is done, and he's out there celebrating with teammates, and it just is a bad look for the MLB. And if your perspective on this is he's been with them already, it doesn't matter. If your perspective is, hey, he's allowed to celebrate with his team, and he wasn't masked up all the time. He was out there taking it off. He was right next to manager Dave Roberts with it off. And regardless if you're like, well, he was already by the team, and so you can still spread this thing. You may have been near the team, but you might have had a teammate you were not near, and then now all of a sudden you were near that teammate in celebration. Now it's passed on. Now they take it somewhere. I mean, it is just a bad look. And I'm just looking at the MLB, I'm looking at the Dodgers, and I just want some honesty on what are we doing here? What are we doing? Because we were not able to play games this year because of this stuff. And I feel bad taking anything away from Justin Turner because he's been there for so long as well. He deserves the right to celebrate just as much as anybody else on this team. But it's just a precaution move. And the MLB, they're going to take some lumps for this one. And I'm curious to see if any type of fine or punishment comes to the Dodgers, because the Dodgers organization has to know. He wasn't pulled in the 7th inning for random reasons. Justin Turner would not have been pulled under any circumstances at third base. Like that's not happening. So we know something is up. The team has to know there's a reason he's being pulled. And being allowed back on the field, no problem, it's just interesting. It just seems like a bad lapse of judgment. And I just, it's hard. I understand why Turner wants to be out there, despite the positive test, but it just feels like precaution was thrown out of the window. And it was just hysterical about how some of these teams, or some of these reports were saying that he wasn't out there. And then you see him clearly in photos, in the post-game coverage. There's a lot going on there. And I'm curious to what the next steps for the MLB is going to be. Now, Justin Turner is a free agent, so that makes things even a little more complicated when it comes to any type of punishment, because are you going to punish the team? Are you going to punish Turner? What's going to happen here? So it's something to keep your eyes on. I just sit back and kind of shake my head and just wonder how it happened. Just even out for everyone to see. It seemed like it was very poor decisions being made. So that's going to be it. Talking about that World Series Game 6. Kind of a little bit of a downer thing to talk about. You got to give your props to the Dodgers. Still want to congratulate them on a World Series, but I still sit here and shake my head a little bit on how we're going to look at this ending just with what happened. So we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some players with some options on the 2021 season, get you updated on everybody and what we've seen so far on all of these decisions here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So we just got done with the World Series, given all that conversations. Game 6, our champions, Los Angeles Dodgers. And once that game ends, once that series is over, well, we need to move on to the offseason and some decisions. And there is a lot of players with options and opt-outs when it comes to the 2021 season. And we talked about on the top of the show some guys where options have been declined by teams. And we'll still cover a few of those again just to make sure that we hit all our bases. But there is still a lot of other players that we need to be talking about. And we're going to kind of focus mainly on the guys that are going to be tough decisions. What the team is going to do moving forward. Because there's some of these where the teams really could go either way. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do the buyout, if they do the picking up of the option. It could go in a lot of different directions. The first one that I am really curious to see is because it would add to our pitching market even more, even though we haven't been seeing him as much, is Chris Archer with the Pirates. Now, he has an $11 million club option or a $250,000 buyout. And it seems like an easier decision to go to the buyout for the Pirates as they are kind of rebuilding here. But what makes this interesting is the Pirates kind of picked up Archer's $9 million option last offseason. But he didn't pitch at all in 2020 after having season-ending surgery on June 2nd. And Archer is considered to be coming back in full competition next year. But it seems unlikely you're going to want to commit $11 million to him, especially coming off a big surgery. And the last time we saw him pitch, Archer obviously didn't look that great. If the Pirates are being optimistic, they might pick it up in hopes that, okay, if we get something good out of him, we can trade him for more assets. And that's really kind of the only move that I would see if he is picked up. The Pirates think he's going to be fine. They can trade him at the deadline and make something out of him because they definitely lost in that trade with Tampa Bay and trading for Archer. And if it is not picked up, if it's declined and they do the buyout, he becomes a low-risk contract, low-level contract, I think, for a lot of teams to look at. He's a guy that you can say, hey, if we get him at his best, he'd be a solid, cheap number 3 option for us. And I think that's the way it's most likely going to break down, which with some of the moves we've already seen so far, it's made the starting pitching market interesting. Another name that's going to be kind of up in the air is Dylan Betances for the Mets. Really, it's a lot of times easy for relief pitchers in which they do not look that great. I mean, it's a $6 million player option, $3 million buyout. The buyout is what makes this one tough. He only needs to beat a $3 million contract in free agency to justify not picking up the option. But is he going to get $3 million is more of the question. He just had a 7.71 ERA last season. He was not himself as a reliever. So he needs to know that he's going to be getting a great deal on the free agent market. And that's not necessarily a guarantee. And if you beat $3 million, okay, fine, you get the $3 million buyout, you get more on top of that. Otherwise, you got to take that guaranteed 6. And he's turning 33 in March. He's a 4-time All-Star with a 2.21 ERA, so some teams might get excited just because of his past. But there is some concern, especially looking at how he performed this last season. Some other options that we've seen recently getting declined. The Ryan Braun for the Brewers had a $15 million option, $4 million buyout. His option was declined. And we're sitting here and we're going to be looking at the career of Ryan Braun and saying, is it over? Is he going to be signing elsewhere? It's really, I think, 2 moves. I think he's coming back to the Brewers potentially on a cheaper deal, potentially, or he's going to the American League to DH. I see that as really kind of the only 2 options. I think his outfield days are pretty limited unless if he's going to one specific team. He's going to be 37 years old. He hit .233 last year with 8 home runs in 39 games. It's not awful. I mean, in a full season, the year before, 22 homers in 2019. So there's definitely some clubs that might be interested in him and could take the chance. But I think it's American League or Brewers, and that's really kind of the only choices. So we'll see what happens with him going forward. And, it's important to say because the DH is not going to be used in the National League next year. I really do wonder if the Brewers would have considered having him back or if just that $15 million number was too much. Going over to the Nationals, Adam Eaton, he had a $10.5 million club option, $1.5 million buyout. That option was also declined. He sustained a season-ending injury with his left index finger. It happened in mid-September. And Juan Soto came to right field in that stretch. That's what's important of the situation, and he was performing well, doing good over there. And it shows that Soto's a little more flexible, so the Nationals might go into the offseason knowing that they can kind of look at either spot. It could be a move in which they can bring him back on a shorter, smaller deal, but it feels like Eaton's days might be done for the Nationals as they have that flexibility to really go sign anybody else when it comes to left field, right field, and have Juan Soto kind of play the other spot because he showed that he was flexible in that situation. We talked about Edwin Encarnacion, that option being declined. He had a $12 million club option. DH is all he can really do at this point. 34 homer season between the Mariners and Yankees in 2019, but 2020 not as solid. Hit only 157. He's going to be 38 years old in January. A team that's willing to take a risk maybe for him in the DH spot is out there, but you're limiting your options again. That's half the league that might take you on, and there aren't 15 teams that need DH help right away. So it's going to be a tough, small contract most likely for Encarnacion wherever he ends up going next. Moving over to the Yankees, Brett Gardner, he had a $10 million club option, $2.5 million buyout. That option was declined as well. He is our long-tenured Yankee. He wants to return to the Yankees. He said that. He played down the stretch, had a little bit of a solid postseason, but he hit only .223 in the season, and he turns 37 in August. 26-year-old Clint Frazier showed potential, and he's the one kind of sitting back there behind. And Frazier also showed that he has improved defensively, so we don't know if that move to return to the Yankees is going to be there. If he's willing to be a bench guy and maybe commit to that, it's potential. Now, it needs to be said in 2019, we saw one of Gardner's best season as he had 28 homers, 74 RBIs, slugging at 503 OPS, 829. That was just a season ago, so maybe the Yankees think that he has that in him if we go back to a full season. Hard to say, but this may be the end of it for Gardner in New York. Going back to the Brewers, Jed Jerko, he had a $4.5 million club option, $1 million buyout. That was declined. The Brewers are ultimately going to be looking to try to improve at the corners, and Jerko could return on a smaller deal. He definitely had some positive moments for the Brewers. He was one of their few hitters that looked like he had any type of consistency, but age being another thing we have to look at when it comes to Jerko. Brad Hand, we had talked about previously as well, $10 million club option, $1 million buyout. Postseason was not great for him. Blew a save for the Indians in the Wild Card Series, but he was our guy that led the American League in saves in the regular season. $10 million was just too rich for the Indians. He adds to our very, very loaded closer position in the offseason. I'm not counting out any type of reunion with the Indians, but he's definitely not going to be getting that $10 million number that he just had. With the Nationals, another one, Howie Kendrick had a $6.5 million option. The buyout was $2.25. The buyout was done. The option was declined. Corey Kluber, another guy we talked about. The Rangers saving $17 million by that move. He's going to be someone that's going to be interesting on the free agent market. John Lester as well. $10 million buyout instead of paying the $25 million. Cubs just trying to save some money there. Charlie Morton as well, $15 million club option. There was no buyout. It was just an option decline. But going to some other guys that decisions have not been made 100% yet, we have Daniel Murphy, who has a $12 million mutual option for the Rockies, $6 million buyout. I would guess they're going to pay the buyout. He's turning 36, had career lows in OPS in 40 games, 236 batting average. Didn't look like himself. He came after he was hitting 279 with 13 homers in the 2019 season with Colorado, but it just feels like they're going to move on with him, get that cheap buyout, save some money after he wasn't performing as well. Wilson Ramos, he had a $10 million club option, the catcher for the Mets, $1.5 million buyout. Actually been updated. That option has been declined as well. Was an all-star in 2016 and an all-star in 2018, but greatly struggled in the final year of his contract. He hit 288 with 14 homers, 73 RBIs in his debut season with the Mets. This year, 239. Catcher help is always wanted out there, and there will be teams that will be looking at the 33-year-old, but you're going to be hoping that you get the early Mets contract Ramos then instead of the one we just saw. Colton Wong, he had a $12.5 million club option, $1 million buyout. That was declined as well for the Cardinals, saving quite a bit of money there. But that would also be another guy that I could see returning on a cheaper deal. But other teams I think will be considered as well. Other players to be considered in this, Roberto Perez, catcher for Cleveland, Chase Anderson for the Blue Jays, Mike Zunino we talked about, Eric Thames for the Nationals, most likely will be a free agent, Brandon Kinsler for the Miami Marlins, just to name a few of them. Now, some names that are unlikely to most likely be opting out. Nick Castellanos had a 3-year, $48 million contract left, and he had a player opt out. And with how he played early in the season, that opt-out might have been in consideration because he was hitting the ball well, hitting a lot of home runs, producing. But then he fell apart a little bit. In the first 14 games, he was at 340 batting average, 7 home runs, and 16 RBIs. He maintained that. Yeah, opt-out would have been there. But he finished the year 225 to go with 14 homers in 60 games. So definitely slowed his way down. I imagine he's going to stay there, remain in Cincinnati, and stay in that contract. Starling Marte had a $12.5 million club option, $1 million buyout. This is a cheap option. Cheap for Starling Marte. That option got picked up. He's going to be staying in Miami. And even if they don't want him, that's an easy contract you can trade in the next coming trade deadline. So not much there. JD Martinez is going to be an interesting decision. He's got 2 years, $38.75 million. He has a player opt-out. He has not made his decision yet. And he was great in 2019. Bumped down in 2020. He hit .213 with 7 homers. And it was interesting in those 54 games with the Red Sox because the Red Sox offense ultimately was not an issue. And he was not batting well. And that's big change when it came from his other first 2 seasons in Boston, where combined he was batting .317, averaging 40 home runs and 118 RBIs. He was an MVP type player. So coming off of a year of uncertainty, I imagine that he is going to stay in Boston and try to rebound. And Boston's probably going to be fine with that decision as they're going to be trying to fix some things. And if he looks fine, he could be a trade candidate. And if he doesn't, well, then we're in a rebuild anyway. So I don't imagine there will be much there. Anthony Rizzo for the Cubs has a $14.5 million club option, $2 million buyout. This one you most likely is going to see get picked up. He's still been productive. He hit .222, but he's just a big part. He's a Gold Glover. He's an all-star, big part of the Cubs organization. He's a kind of a face of a franchise type thing. Maybe a deal gets restructured at some point, but the Cubs have big decisions coming their way when it comes to Chris Bryant and Javi Baez. But those two had their struggles at the plate as well last year, so it makes it easier to pick up the option for Anthony Rizzo. Giancarlo Stanton, he has an opt-out, but there's just no possible way. He's got 7 years, $218 million left. You're not opting out of that. He is a postseason stud for the Yankees. Health is a problem, obviously. He strikes out a lot, but he's going to enjoy that security of that contract, and he's not letting that go. There's some other players that would be interesting. Merrill Kelly for the Diamondbacks, Martin Perez for Boston, Louis Garcia for the White Sox, Mitch Moreland for San Diego. There's other names out there. But these are kind of the big names that it looks like a lot of them will be opting in or options will be picked up by their teams. Free agency is going to be loaded. There's a lot that's already been added to it. Excited to look into it. And we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk about it. And we're going to touch upon what's going on in free agency. Let's go guide by position in our final segment after this quick break.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
So the 2021 free agency is going to be filled with a lot of names, and these options have definitely been making things a little more interesting. I will say that off the start. But this isn't a massively loaded free agency like we've been seeing in the past, and the extent of some of the big contracts that are going to come. Now, there's definitely guys that are going to get paid. Let's not forget that. But we have just more mid-level, mid-tier guys, I would say, going forward. Now, we're going to go position by position. We're going to talk about this. This is going to be our free agent guide to get a lot of names out there, even some interesting names. We're going to talk about a lot of these guys' age, where they're at, and their WAR that they've had in recent years. Okay, so players are going to be grouped by position that they played the most. Okay. We're going to be using the most played position in 2020, and Fangraphs win above replacement. Okay. The age that I'm going to be giving you is going to be the 2021 seasonal age. Okay. And that 2019-2020 war is included as well. So starting at the catcher position, this is where probably our biggest offensive free agent is going to be in JT Realmuto. He is 30 years old with a 7.4 WAR. Easily our best guy. He might be the best catcher in baseball overall. He's going to have quite a few suitors. Just off the top of my head, the Phillies are going to love to have him back. The Yankees could be interested to move on. And the Mets are also a team to be watching as Wilson Ramos's option was declined. They need to fill that position as well. The suitors are going to be there. It's all going to be the market of what the catcher's going to get. An offensive and defensive stud behind the plate. He's going to help a team. So we are going to probably see him get the best contract, offensive contract, out of a lot of guys this offseason. Looking down the list, James McCann at 31 is a free agent. Tyler Flowers, Jason Castro. We talked about Wilson Ramos. Yadier Molina at 38 is a free agent, but can you really ultimately see him out of St. Louis? I don't think I can. And the list kind of really continues on with a lot of guys that are older. The position, just a lot of older guys. You look down the list, and a lot of them are 33, 34 plus in age. It's going to be a lot of depth moves where you're going to be splitting that catcher position, I imagine, with another guy for sure. JT Realmuto leads that class just by a long shot. Now, first baseman. A lot of this is going to depend on that Anthony Rizzo option. But we're just going to take him out of this right now. And the names for first baseman, if you want a power hitting guy, good luck. Now, Carlos Santana will be the big name, but at 35 years old, he's not the Carlos Santana we're used to. Estrudo Cabrera is there. He's 35 as well. Mitch Moreland at 35. Starting to see some of these names are not so appealing for these first basemen. Eric Thames will be there. CJ Cron and Jed Jerko can play the position as well as Ryan Zimmerman, who's coming off not playing last year for the Nationals, having an opt-out. I struggled to see him outside of Washington as well, but you never really know. And then the list is kind of some journeymen as well. First base is not somewhere where you're looking to upgrade on the free agent market this offseason. Second base, our other big name, guy who most likely is going to be interesting in the contract situation, is DJ LeMahieu at 32 years old. He had a 7.8 WAR. He was one of the best hitters in baseball last year, batting average-wise. And his 2 years with the Yankees have been phenomenal. The Yankees are going to struggle to let him walk. That's a gap that they probably don't want to fill because he has been a big part of their offense. But at 32, he's also going to probably be looking at some money and security. So LeMahieu is going to be popular when it comes to a lot of the searches across the MLB. Base is a position where you have a lot of interesting candidates because behind him you have Colton Wong at 30 years old, Jonathan Villar, 30 years old, Cesar Hernandez at 31, Tommy La Stella, who had a good season with the Angels before being traded over to Oakland, at 32, Jonathan Scope at 29. Gosh, 29, he seems older than that. He feels like he's been around a while. Jason Kipnis at 34, and then Kiki Hernandez at 29. And the list keeps going. Joe Panik, Neil Walker, Jed Lowry. There's names there for some depth moves. Maybe not your everyday starter, but they're there. Second base is a loaded position where you can get some guys, and even some of these second basemen, I imagine, will be comfortable playing a little bit of third base as well, being more utility guys. But it's a loaded position. So if you need a second baseman, good year in free agency for you. Now, third base, this is our other corner spot. We talked about it, how first base didn't look that great. Third base isn't much better. Now, Justin Turner is going to be the headliner name here, but he is 36 years old, getting up there in age. I would more likely guess some sort of security deal, or he's returning on a deal to the Dodgers. After that, Eric Sogard, Todd Frazier, Marwin Gonzalez, Brock Holt. It's just not great company. So if you are looking to upgrade at your corners, third base, first base, trade market most likely is going to be your better option to get that done. Moving on to the shortstops, there is some interesting names here. Now, the names are not deep, but interesting. Marcus Semien, coming from Oakland, had a phenomenal MVP type season in 2019. Now, MVP caliber, wasn't our MVP winner. 2020 was a little bit more down. The contract discussion is going to be interesting on what you are expecting. He is 30 years old, so he's not over the hill just yet, having an 8.8 WAR from 2019-2020. He's going to get a lot of options, and it makes me concerned if you're an Oakland A's fan, because Oakland is another team we know that doesn't go crazy with their spending. They'll also have some other decisions to be made. Semien could be someone cashing in on a contract somewhere else. After Semien, we have Jose Iglesias at 31 years old. Didi Gregorius. Iglesias, I believe, has a player option, so that has to be declined first. Didi Gregorius, after his 1-year stint with the Phillies, who had an all right season for them, and Drolton Simmons and Freddie Galvis. It's really just those 5 names at the shortstop position. Some all right names, but not a lot of depth there. So across the infield, we're still kind of leaning on those second basemen being better, but maybe some teams will believe, hey, these second basemen can defensively play short. We'll see where we go from there. But other than that, first base, third base, shortstop, not as loaded free agent-wise this year as our second base and catcher have to be. Looking at outfielders, left fielders, kind of led by Michael Brantley, 34 years old, 5.5 WAR in that 2019-2020 season. He headlines there in the left field position because after that, Brett Gardner, 37, Jock Peterson, and then Jerickson Profar, Robbie Grossman, Ryan Braun, Jay Bruce. Definitely not a group of young guys, a lot more bats than they are defensive players at this point. It looks like some of these guys could be looking for DH roles with playing situational outfield if absolutely needed. Center field, George Springer, another Astro that we have to be talking about. The Astros have some big decisions that they're going to have to make when it comes to their outfielder. He's 31 years old, 8.4 WAR, looking to be one of our better outfielders in the free agent market. And behind him, Jackie Bradley Jr., defensive specialist coming from Boston, but had one of his better hitting seasons in the 2020 season. So some teams might try to bank on that. You're getting great defense. Like you just know that. It's coming with Jackie Bradley. Can he continue that hitting streak and go from there? Kevin Pillar, also a center field name to be looking at. Jared Dyson, and then Billy Hamilton, the speedster. May not give you much with a bat, but on the base pass and defensively, he can help a team out. For right fielders, Adam Eaton kind of leading the way, but it's not by much. 32 years old, 1.9 WAR. Behind him, Cameron Maybin, 34 years old, 1.8 WAR. Yasiel Puig, an interesting name to watch. Don't know if or when he'll be back in the league, but he is a free agent going into this offseason. Matt Joyce, 36 years old. Josh Reddick, another Astros outfielder. So there it is again. The Astros having to make some decisions there. Then Nick Markakis, Domingo Santana, John Jay, just to name a few of them. Outside of really Springer and Brantley, there is a lot of decisions to be made. It's bare. It's not a loaded class for outfielders. It's more of a depth move type class. So it's looking like a lot of teams, if they massively want to upgrade in most of their fielding positions, you're going to have to look to trade. But if you just want to shore up some depth on your team, get some situational playing guys, then you can start looking at free agency. Now, designated hitters are going to be interesting because there's quite a few names here that could come into play. Nelson Cruz, after his 40-year-old season, he was great. He's going to get MVP votes. He's going to be considered. Was one of the better bats for the Twins all year, and he was steady all season. But right behind him, another name, a guy that could be in the outfield as well, but we'll get some designated hitter love, is Marcell Ozuna. At just 30 years old, he came off a very productive offensive season for the Atlanta Braves. I would take a guess that the Braves are very interested in a reunion there, but we'll see if he priced himself out of that. Howie Kendrick, most likely stepping away from the Nationals, looking for some sort of DH position. Edwin Encarnacion at 38. Outside of DH, there's not much else he can do. We'll have to look at JD Martinez. We talked about it a little bit with the contract situation if he wants to move. Hard to say. Shin-Soo Choo at 38 years old is going to be there as well, along with a list of other names just people are used to. Yoenis Cespedes is going to make his return. Matt Adams, Matt Kemp, are they going to be around for a little bit more? Pablo Sandoval got a little great run. Derek Dietrich, just a lot of DH names, and there's just not as many holes to fill in the American League in the DH when we consider the fact the National League won't have it next year. And lastly, let's look at our pitchers. And now the list of names for pitchers is long. I want to start with just some names that I'm interested in. So we talked about Charlie Morton, obviously, with the Rays. 37 years old, getting that option. He will be interesting to see, but Tampa Bay believes that they will be getting him back. And then we have the prize name, Trevor Bauer. And his discussion, his contract will be interesting. He said he wants to do one-year deals, maximize his value. So it's going to be the team that is willing to offer him a massive contract at 1 year. It could be 25 to 30 million around there. Now, there's some other names that'll be interesting in the sense of you're trying to pay for upside, like Mike Minor, Jake Dorizzi, Tanaka from the Yankees, Marcus Stroman, who didn't pitch at all this year, really, James Paxton from the Yankees, Jose Quintanilla, who's coming off a season that's, he wishes he probably could upgrade from Chicago, Rick Porcello, and the list goes on and on and on. There's a lot of names here. So if you're looking for starting pitching depth, you're going to find somebody. It's going to be just looking at a lot of bounce back seasons for quite a few players, that's for sure. But what is potentially a lot of a strength for us is there is some closing potential out there. Liam Hendricks, reliever of the year for the Oakland A's, is a free agent. Kirby Yates, coming off the books, being a free agent. Brad Hand, talked about just getting that player option decline. Brandon Workman, Ken Giles. There's a lot of names out there. Alex Colome was a guy that was in discussions. There's a long list of guys, and some of those guys are coming off of great seasons in the sense of the 60-game season, I feel like put a boost to quite a few relievers. With not having as many opportunities, shortened season allowed for their numbers to be a little bit better because of appearances. There's a lot of guys that could help out some bullpens. So if you are looking for bullpen help, this is going to be a good offseason for you, headlined by some big, big names in the MLB. So that's just a quick kind of look at what we have. Just a free agent guide, position by position, what you have. So if you know your team is looking to fill one position in particular, maybe there's a name out there for you. Maybe there's a position you're looking for, and it's looking a little grim for some of you guys. But I think it's going to be a fun offseason. Trade talks have a chance to spike up again with some depth being lacked at some positions. So see if teams are eager to move on from guys, and the contracts overall are going to look interesting. With the money that was lost this, whole season, what's going to be greatly the value for some of these guys? It's going to change. It's not going to be the same as when we saw Harper and Machado and those guys hit free agency. It's going to be very, very different. So that's going to be it for me here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. Your host, Collin Manley. Thank you again for listening. It means a great deal. Your support, always appreciated. One last thing, if you have the opportunity, I would love it if you could leave a positive review or comment on the show, maybe something you want to hear about. Maybe you have some free agents that you're looking forward to, some updates or even thoughts on that Game 6 World Series that you'd love to let it be known. Helps the show a great deal. It means a lot. I want to thank you so much for that. So thank you once again for listening to me here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.